The history of violence in the United States is quite complex and continues to cast its shadow today. Police departments across the U.S. define violent crime in slightly different ways, but the data usually includes murder, robbery, assault, and rape. Dr. Terrance Baker, the host of Doctor in the House, examines the history of violence in the U.S. with Lisa Charles, the author of bestseller Yes, and Commit, Do, Live.
So, welcome back, Lisa Charles, a well-known author, and today we're talking about the increase in violent crime that we're seeing around the world. And we want to pick up with particularly racial tensions that seem to be increasing and rising frustrations that are being manifested through acts of violence. Lisa, what are your observations in terms of growing racial tensions and how that's acting out in communities around the world?
Well, I'm going to say that, we've touched a little bit on communication, and that's always going to have a role in how we look and how we are able to relate across religious lines, across racial lines we're talking about right now. The ability to communicate, to empathize, to sympathize, to understand, to really hear, to really take in information. I often think, I was on a podcast recent, it's called Cancel Me Baby, but it was about, we were talking about they were talking about this very issue. And our ability to talk across racial lines and say, take on something that's a tough topic. And what I said then, and I'll say now, is that people have to be able to understand that there are real issues that exist. So you can take anything that may have exploded into a racially tension or violent issue, be it a certain killing that happened with a police officer and a person. Someone could come to you and say, okay, that's only this situation. Why are everyone think that it applies to everyone? But someone else could come and say, there's a history here. I come from a history where there has been violence perpetrated to my race. And so if they don't feel heard saying that, then they think that person, they categorize, well, that person must be a racist, or that person, as opposed to maybe there's a moment of pause to see if there's a chance to educate, or if there's a chance to really communicate and listen and be educated on the other side of the coin as well. And so for me right now, we're just at a moment where we don't really talk and we don't really listen. And there's not really the interest in some to really hear what someone really is saying, what the emotion is. So for me, a lot of this is an opportunity for education, an opportunity for a pause. One of the things that I love to do, and it's not direct on the violence, but it's a sub issue of it, is that a lot of people don't feel like they're seen. And so I love just to be able to open up dialogue about this whole thing of history, the richness of the combined history that we share, and be able to start the conversation there as opposed to the ignited moment. And for people to start to see how much more we have in common than we have as a difference. And it starts there because at the time of someone is at the point where they're going to throw something in a window and break it, or be violent against someone else, that's not the time where conversation is really going to take place, but it's in the aftermath and it's in the reflection. I also just want to say, and I know you wanted to add something, but a lot of it too is the loss of personal ownership of the behavior or that you're having. So you don't have a right to do something that hurts somebody else, regardless of your reason, regardless of the history, regardless of whatever you put as maybe solid reasons in your thought process as to why you're doing something. There is a personal ownership. There is a core of right and wrong that used to be the things that was the fabric of what we talked and what we were taught and what we were reinforced in school. And so if you step outside of that, that is something that you have to come back and really look at. Did this reflect the best of me as a human being? Did this behavior really serve anything other than self gratification at the moment?
No, I agree with you, Lisa. And when I'm even in my office and even among my staff and the medical organizations where I am a member, what I'm finding is that the pandemic accelerated a loss of the ability of men of color, men of less color, women, to speak openly about concerns that they have, to have a dialogue, have a relationship, communication, not necessarily because you agree with one another, and over some issues you may never agree. For example, growing up as a poor white child in a poverty-stricken home in rural Pennsylvania was very different than being an African American child or a Native American Indian child in the same community. Yes, we shared the community, but our experiences were uniquely different.
Exactly.
Today I'm a physician. The Native American individual who I grew up with, he owns his own store. And the African American continues to have a body shop and repair cars and is very successful. We all had very different experiences, but what was the point? The point is that as children and as adults, we never stopped talking. We never stopped relating our lives to one another. We never stopped sharing. We never stopped understanding. We'll never be the same, and our experiences will never be the same. We're all uniquely created by our Maker, and we're all uniquely created by our genetics and by the lives that we live, in part the lives that we voluntarily live and the lives that are forced on us by society. We're all uniquely different, and we all have a story to tell. But what I found in my practice, Lisa, is we just stopped telling the stories. We just stopped relating to each other. What have you seen?
And I think stop telling the stories, but also if someone starts to tell something, there's a quick response instead of really understanding and listening and sitting on something. It may not be something, as you said earlier, that you agree with. Maybe you don't agree because it's not your experience, or maybe you don't agree because you have other reasons why, but it doesn't mean that that's not that person's experience. And so I think we've moved away from that whole concept of really giving understanding, giving the ability for someone to have the floor, if you will, to speak their truth and to be empathetic and understanding as much as you can, but also, the old proverb, being able to walk in the soles of someone else's shoe. Maybe you don't walk the same way they do, but you give it a try. You really try to understand from that kind of deep internal level. And until we get back there, to me, what I do see is it just seems like two people yelling at each other, but no one hears what's happening. And so they walk away from that interaction as frustrated, as isolated, as angry as they were before they came into the interaction. So I can't emphasize enough this importance to just to have people to come together and to listen. And maybe your response isn't going to even be instantaneous that day. Like we're this society that everything has to be wrapped up in a bow in a moment. Maybe you have to sit on it a moment. Maybe it's something that you have to come back to a later time and say, I really thought about what you said, and I read something you sent, and then I allowed myself to see. I may disagree with you on XYZ, but I understand this point differently than I did before. That simple statement would take us so much further if it's racial tensions, if it's religious tensions, violence against Asians that have been going on. Whatever the tensions are, it would take us so much forward if people would just take a moment, take a beat, take a breath, and be able to be that empathetic, sympathetic human being that you are capable of being.
No, I agree. And in my own life, what I've realized is that during the pandemic, spending so much time alone, even though I was treating patients, I began to think that the only and perhaps the best opinion in the world was mine. But recently I've realized that most of the mass shooters and most of the mass assassinations, the individual has been trying to talk. Social media, family, counselors, classmates, school officials, but no one was listening. And perhaps the best skill that we must relearn is to be the patient listener. Yes, you have your experiences, and yes, you have your opinions, but by being a patient listener, just if you're in a school board meeting, even if you totally disagree with the opinion being expressed, just listen.
Yes.
And from the
That's
listening comes
thing.
some learning and some tolerance. And I think this is something you point out in your book, Yes, Commit, Do, and Live, which is the need to sometimes just patiently listen.
Yes, and live in the breath and live in all of that that'll allow you to be in that brain-body position internally, that is going to be for you to really take in any information and to really respond in a responsible way. And I think there's a holistic approach to all of this too. One of the things that I really emphasize on the wellness way and the wellness way to really address some of the issues, the underlying issues we're talking about. Because if you are not sleeping, if you don't eat in a healthy way, if you're not moving your body, if you're not doing those things that really support internal wellness, there is no way you're going to be your best at dealing with difficult situations. There's no way. You will be incapable of it. And so a lot of my emphasis is really on giving you the fundamentals of how can I switch my brain from being in a high state of stress to a relaxed state so that I can deal better with a situation that's before me. How can I, what does sleep have to do with the fact that that's going to make me a better person when I have to confront or when I'm going to, to a difficult situation or just to a normal high stress situation? Even those techniques that makes that person that's the victim of a bully. And I'm going to say this, growing up, I had a horrible bully situation when I was in 4th grade, and it was horrendous for me. And it was so hard to communicate. And so when I hear about these kids that are consistently bullied and having no one to look or to speak to, it's not something that we need to sweep under the rug. Part of it is not only giving the listening ear, but also be attuned to what's going on in our community. Like if someone looks like they're in stress, to be able to go to them and talk to them, to say, how are you? What do you need? As an educator, but also just as a community person that lives. We see people all the time. And so what we have to do also in our road to really healing ourselves as a nation is stop putting our blinders on to the people that are around us and the things that are happening, and be willing to step into an act of kindness, a simple kindness of checking on our fellow human being to see where they are. You don't know what you may have prevented from happening, violence to self or to others, just because you took a moment to relate to someone else and to make sure that they knew that there was someone out there that cared.
No, I think you're right, and thank you for being with us, Lisa Charles. Something to think about as we part today from Doctors in the House is, when was the last time that you just did something nice for no reason for someone else, a family member, a friend, a neighbor, a relative, a total stranger? When was the last time you took a moment to do a random act of kindness? Just be nice to somebody for absolutely no reason other than to be nice and to make their day, at least for a moment, better. It's impossible to know in the course, if you just do it once a day for 365 days, exponentially you will affect thousands and thousands of people who will then turn around and reproduce a random act of kindness for someone else. So just a parting thought from here, doctors in the house, having spent the afternoon with Lisa Charles. We recommend that you consider starting a pattern of random acts of kindness. I'm your host, Terrance Baker. It's been a delight to be with Lisa Charles this afternoon. And you've been with Doctors in the House discussing violence in America, reasons and solutions. Thank you.
New Africa Broadcasting Network.